bringing sports, entertainment, and technology podcasts together. This is SPNT.
You're listening to the Who-Dey Weekly Podcast. Who-Dey Weekly is brought to you by Stitcher.com. Download the Stitcher Smart Radio app today at Stitcher.com/SPNT. What's going on, Bengals fans? It's Who-Dey Weekly, episode 81 of the podcast. So glad you could join us. I'm your host, Nick Subling, flying solo tonight, folks. As far as the regular cast goes, Mickey is out of town doing some work. Tim, obviously, we know his story. He's been busy with work as well, so hopefully we'll be able to catch up with those guys next week. Bengals victorious over the weekend over the Cleveland Browns. It was a closer than anticipated game, I would say. Bengals didn't play their best. Cleveland played better than we thought they would, but ultimately Bengals get the win. 34-27, moved to 1-1 on the year, and now it's a three-way race at the top of the AFC North standings. It should be an interesting next couple of weeks here, as we talked about earlier on the podcast, that the Bengals' schedule's front-loaded as far as the ease of the schedule. Hopefully they can get some wins over the next couple of weeks. Big win for the Bengals. Now they head out to the nation's capital to take on the Washington Redskins. We'll talk about that game a little bit later on. But before we can do that, just want to remind you, you can email us at podcast@whodayyfans.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Who-Dey Weekly. I got a special guest this week joining us. He's been on the podcast before. He's Zach Baker. He's the sports editor at the Advertiser-Tribune in Tiffin, Ohio. He is a Browns fan, but he also covers Ohio sports. Zach, how you been, man?
I've been great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing better. I mean, considering the Bengals finally got on the win column, but your Browns, they surprised me over the weekend.
They surprised me a little bit too. I think that I was surprised that Brandon Weeden was able to throw for over 300 yards, and I'm not too surprised by what Trent Richardson did. I think a lot of people sounded surprised, but really I think everybody knew he had that type of potential. The fact that Weeden could sort of turn it around. Now, I don't want to make too big of a deal out of the numbers because a lot of that was done against the zone coverage. Kind of, they were playing zone in that last drive when he kind of picked up those extra 50 yards of passing. But generally, a big improvement from Weeden. But you know what? And I think you probably know this as well as anybody being Bengals fans and the 90s that you guys had to go through. You don't pick up moral victories. You get them by winning, and moral victories don't mean anything, and the Browns are 0-2, and that's that.
Oh. The Bengals are, it feels like we're the kings of moral victories. Those games that you should have won but you didn't, but you came close. So, we're all too familiar with those wins. But when you consider the way that they played as far as the offense goes in week one against Philly, Zach, to come out and have Brandon Weeden throw much better, 300 yards passing for a guy who had a quarterback rating of 5 in week one. I mean, that's something to build on.
Well, he actually had a 5.1 quarterback rating the first week. He had a 5.2 ERA as a single-A pitcher with the Yankees. So there was some symmetry there. I think that if you look at how he performed, a lot more pocket awareness. It's very hard to pick up sometimes to see confidence. But I think as the game continued, you could see more confidence, particularly on the second to last drive, the last touchdown drive that he drove down the field, finding Greg Little over the middle. That was a throw that he would not have made a week ago. Now, you expect the progression to be quicker. It has to be when you have a 28-year-old rookie on under center. But I was impressed with how he just hit the comfort level, seemed to pick up. The offensive line got better as the game went on, and certainly a step in the right direction for him. I think the biggest adjustment the Browns made, or the biggest step in the right direction, was Trent Richardson looking much healthier than he did in week one. And, that I think there were two plays there that are going to be plays that we're going to see all year. The play that your guy made for 50 yards when he broke 1,000 tackles seemingly and ran across the field for a touchdown. And saw it in my nightmares the last 4 days. But the other one was Trent Richardson's touchdown. Both things were, if you're a fan of offensive football, those things were things of beauty right there.
You're not staying up late thinking about the Pac-Man Jones punt return for a touchdown?
Oh man, don't mention that name to me. Pac-Man. Here's the thing about that. The Browns have done that a lot to a lot of teams with Josh Cribbs.
That's right.
To have Pac-Man do it as, and there's a big part of me that has a huge problem with Pac-Man being in the league after what he was responsible for many years ago. I guess I have to throw in allegedly here, but the bottom line is he's playing, and they didn't do a very good job on the return, and that was the 7 points that helped to make the difference there. And I think that yes, that was a huge problem, and the Browns are not good enough to overcome the hidden yard problem with the special teams. If you allow a team to return a punt for a touchdown, you have no one to blame but yourself if you lose that game. There's just too much working in your favor on a punt return, and that was a huge problem. I still think that the larger issue for us now is just how poorly the secondary played in Joe Hayden's absence, and that's kind of what stood out.
Now, come on now. In Adam Jones's defense, Zach, he's been a model citizen for the last 3 seasons.
All I know about Pac-Man Jones the last 3 years is that he couldn't cut it in pro wrestling. I know that. He tried that for a while. He's been a model citizen, I guess. But to have him do it to you is always a little bit frustrating. And there's lots of things. I mean, every team has had guys on their roster that you wonder about. And so, there's always questions about it. I mean, and I could you guys as Bengals fans, you hear it a lot, but I mean, Cleveland was a team that drafted Eric Wright, and he had issues in 2007. It's part of it. But I guess the big problem is, even if it had been somebody else who had returned the kick, that is a good way to lose a game. If you cannot win the special teams, and if you lose them drastically by allowing a score, you're not going to win most of the time.
No, you're right. You hit it on the head 100% there, Zach. That was the difference in the ballgame, was that punt return for a touchdown. We're talking to Zach Baker. He's the sports editor of the Advertiser Tribune in Tiffin, Ohio, here on Who-Dey Weekly, a fellow Bowling Green alum. Our Falcons not faring too well early this season, but hey, we'll manage. But this is a Bengals podcast, so let's switch gears back to the Bengals. Defensively, the Bengals now in 2 games, Zach, have given up over 900 yards of offense to opponents within the same division, which is uncharacteristic of this team when you consider the familiarity with both teams. When you look at that statistic alone, how much concern do you have as far as the Bengals defense going out through the rest of the season?
Well, I think it's a huge problem. If you look at the fact that they gave up a 300-yard passer and a 100-yard rusher last week, both of whom were playing in their second ever pro game. And I had just said how much talent I think Trent has. But that's a big problem, because I think when this team has been good, and I think you'll agree with me on this, when the Bengals have been good over recent years, it's been because the defense has pushed them. Coach Zimmer, I think, is one of the most underrated coaches in the NFL. I'm still surprised, quite honestly, that he hasn't had a chance to be a head coach yet. And I think that when the team has been good, when it's had its good seasons, the defense has been something that has driven it. And in two weeks, you've been absolutely the Bengals have been dismantled by guys like Joe Flacco, who I think is a really good quarterback, but I wouldn't yet put him at the elite level, and also by Brandon Weeden, who we all know what he was coming into. I think it's a big problem. But I also think that the thing that kind of stands out to me about this game, and if I was concerned about anything, if I were the Bengals, it would be that the Bengals did not control the ball like I thought that they would. I think the key to having a good defense is being able to keep the defense off the field. And when Ben Jarvis Green Ellis ran for 50 yards, had a couple of nice runs, but he didn't give you the type of game that I think you guys might have been expecting, in the sense that you want a guy who's going to give you 4 to 5 yards a carry and keep the running game going, because when you guys have been successful, it's been the running game that has driven it on offense, kept the defense off the field, kept them rested. It felt like every time that you guys were successful on offense, and I'm sorry if I keep saying you guys, I guess I mean the Bengals every time I say that, but it's just, when the Bengals have been successful, it's always been by a strong running game, controlling the clock, and that has helped the defense be strong. When you don't create a running game, when you're continually living on the big play, a kick return, as great as it is, what it does is it throws your defense right back there out on the field, especially on a day when it was 75, 80 degrees outside. So I think that there's a problem there. The defense was on the field, it seemed like, a lot, especially late there in the second half, and the offense was relying on the big play and not the long drive, and that was probably something that I think affected them. That has to be a concern moving forward, especially when you're going up next week against a team that I think in the Redskins, it's kind of an unknown quantity. They have the ability to score a lot of points on offense. They did it against the Saints in week 1. That has to be a concern.
I'm very concerned going into that game, just on the RG3 factor alone. One thing that surprised me, and when I was thinking about the game and after watching it, I was surprised to see that the Bengals actually held the ball for almost 33 minutes, Zach. And I don't remember them having the ball that often, especially when you consider how much they were outgained from a yardage perspective. I mean, they were outgained by 50 yards on the ground. I mean, Cleveland barely outpassed us by maybe 10 or so yards.
Right.
But still, that 50 yards on the ground, I guess that really was just the one play. But still, you like that Ben Jarvis Green Ellis had 21 carries. I think that's great. Normally when a Bengals back gets over 20 carries, there's some success there. But 75 yards on those 21 carries, to me, that's not good enough. 3.6 per carry, that's not going to cut it.
And it seemed like they controlled the game better. And maybe I'd have to go back and look at this, and I didn't look at this specifically, but it seemed like they controlled the game better in the first half. In the second half, it seemed like they started to wear down a little bit defensively because they were out. And I would imagine that most of those big running yards, I think, came in the first half. That's how I remember it anyway. Again, I haven't. Sometimes football blends together after you've watched a full game. I would say, though, that was a surprise. Green Ellis getting 21 carries is a very good sign, but I would say that a lot of times it felt like you guys were running the ball because you had to, running the ball because, well, we've got to run the ball. And, it also created a situation where the Browns, if they felt like they could control, because the Browns, this has been the best over 2 weeks. This has been about as good as I can ever remember a Browns front seven playing. And that really showed itself last week.
And this is about the worst I've seen the Bengals front seven play over the last 2 years.
Well, yeah, and that's a big thing, because if you can control a team's ability to run the ball, then you force them into passing situations. And if the Browns had been running out there anything other than an NAIA level defensive backfield as they did last week, maybe it would have made a difference. Because what happened was the Browns were able to force the Bengals into passing situations. Now, they were able to pin them back a few times, get some sacks, 6 sacks. But what happened was the secondary couldn't keep up with the receivers and the tight ends. And as it happened, I think that was the biggest difference in the game. I don't think you're going to have that luxury in coming weeks against teams like the Redskins. And when you get back into the AFC, you're going to be facing a lot better defensive secondaries than the one you faced last Sunday.
When you look at the stats from the game on Sunday, you would think that after throwing for nearly 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, that Bengals Nation would be happy, and that's exactly what Andy Dalton did. But here we are going into week 3, and I don't know what to expect with this team. I don't know who's going to show up. I don't know. I'm confused. I'm concerned. But at the same time, like I haven't given up yet. It's kind of a weird feeling to have right now.
Well, it's always a weird feeling when you start off the season 1-1, and I think when you come away with a prevailing, you're kind of negative about it because you played one really good team. No matter how we feel about the Browns improving, I don't think anybody really believes they're going to the playoffs. So you went into Sunday's game, if you're a Bengals fan, expecting not only a win, but a convincing win. And I don't think it was convincing the way that people expected. So now you follow that up by going to Washington, which is RG3's home opener. And RG3 probably has been, more so than Andrew Luck, more so than any rookie, he has been the most celebrated rookie there is over 2 weeks. And so there's going to be a lot of expectations for this game in Washington for RG3, and deservedly so. He's played very well in the first 2 games, but they're 1-1 as well. There are higher expectations for the Bengals than there are for the Redskins. So if the Redskins go out and they win that game, then I think there's a lot of concern there. And I think that's the root of the concern. It's not knowing what to expect this upcoming week from the Redskins. If you lose this game, if you fall to 1-2, when you expect teams like Baltimore, even though they've got a tough game against the Patriots, like the Steelers, you expect them to keep winning. So every game becomes a little bit more important. And if you don't win that game against the Redskins, well, you've still got a bunch of other tough games coming up, whereas a game that you probably thought going in at the beginning of the season, we can win that game. Well, now it doesn't quite look like that. And I think that's probably, if I had to say, well, what's the concern of the Bengals fans, it's that you don't want to start 1-2 before the meat of this schedule really gets going, because the AFC North has a very tough schedule. We always talk about the Browns schedule being so tough in Cleveland. That's because we're not very good. The Bengals, your schedule is going to be just as tough as ours is, because you're going to be playing a very tough division. You're going to be playing games against against the Steelers, against one more game against the Ravens, two more games against the Steelers. You have to take care of your business. Now, before a couple of weeks ago, that included being able to take care of the Redskins, and I think now there's a lot of uncertainty because the Redskins have played better than I think a lot of people thought they would.
No, again, Zach, you hit it right on the head. Going into the season, just a couple weeks ago, right here on this podcast, we all penciled the Bengals in for a win in Washington. But now, after seeing what they've done the first 2 weeks, I'm nervous. I'm not sure what to expect. We'll touch on the Washington game here in just a bit, but just a couple more things regarding last week's win over the Browns. Adam Jones is your special teams player of the week in the AFC after his punt return touchdown, so kudos to him. A couple other guys that played well, Armon Binns and Brandon Tate. Brandon Tate is a guy who we have killed an awful lot here on this podcast, but it was good to see him with the touchdown catch as well. And who could forget Andrew Hawkins' 50-yarder? I know Zach can't. Probably one of the biggest highlight maybe of the entire week in the NFL last week. So kudos to those guys. Those guys are playing well. And Andy Dalton, once again, 3 touchdowns. Gotta love that. All right, just before we talk about the Washington game, I just want to remind everybody that you can catch Who-Dey Weekly live each and every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at whodayfans.com/video. We'd love to see you in the chat room talking Bengals, talking football. It's a lot of fun, so come check us out each and every week live. And if you can't check us out live, make sure you download the podcast in the iTunes directory, the Zune Marketplace, or at Stitcher Smart Radio. If you have a chance, we'd love to hear your feedback. So if you could leave a review on the iTunes store, we certainly would appreciate it. We've had a ton and a ton of feedback over the last couple of weeks. And, guys, I can't say enough on how great that makes me feel, seeing that you guys love the show and you download it each and every week. So please continue to send your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. You can also email us at podcast@whodayfans.com, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Who-Dey Weekly. It's been a lot of fun live tweeting during the games, so it's cool to catch up with a lot of people like our buddy Reed39 and Bader41, hosts of the Bader Reed Show on the SPNT network. They are not too vulgar, just vulgar enough. All right, so let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Washington Redskins, Zach. When I saw what happened last weekend in their game in St. Louis, Washington had a real good chance to go 2-0. It was just an unfortunate play at the end of the game. I don't know what Josh Morgan was thinking, but he was tackled in field goal range. He got up and threw the ball at Cortland Finnegan. When we all know Finnegan's history, I mean, he's known for this, getting into players' heads, and look what happened. It cost the Redskins the game, essentially. But still, the fact that in his second start, RG3 had his team with a chance to tie it late. I'm shocked that they went into New Orleans, and they really just beat up New Orleans in the Superdome, which is even more surprising. But now they go to Washington, their home opener. They're 5-0 right now. They have 5 consecutive wins in their home opener, Zach. So that does not bode well for the Bengals.
It doesn't, and I think that last year, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, Nick, they did beat the Eli Manning and the Super Bowl champion Giants in the home opener, and they have a history of just coming out, and this is the opposite of, say, my Cleveland Browns, who are just horrible in openers. The Redskins are very, very good in them, and I would say that the Redskins have a history, and let's be honest about this, too. Over the last 5 years, and I would have to go back and look for this for certainty, but doesn't it seem like they always start 2-1, 3-1? And then the bottom falls out. So the most dangerous time to play the Redskins is in the very beginning of the year. And I would say that the biggest thing is trying to still get a handle on what type of player RG3 is, because we've learned that he can go back and he can throw the ball 60 yards for a touchdown. We've learned that if you over pursue him, he can run down the field and give you 15 yards. We've learned that he can dump the ball off and he can read pressure. We've learned all of that. The one thing that he doesn't seem to really do that much so far is the rookie mistakes. And in the first 2 weeks, we haven't really seen them. We've seen other people make what we would consider rookie mistakes, and it cost the Redskins a game. But I would say that from watching him over the first 2 weeks, his poise has been the most impressive thing. Now, it could be because he just feels like nothing is expected of me, and so I can just go out there and just go crazy, and we'll see what happens. Because in the first year, people are going to give you a break. And maybe he felt like, you know what, I'm just going to go out there and play. Now people are starting to pay attention to him. Andrew Luck, we haven't even heard his name that much over the last couple of days. all the talk about the rookies has been, from what I've heard on the national scale, about RG3 and RG3's play. So the more that happens, it'll be interesting to see how he responds to what assumes to be kind of some immediate pressure to continue this sort of play, and that could play into his opponent's hands.
A couple of things that as far as the Bengals go, that really they have on their side. Pierre Garçon looks like he's questionable for this week's game. They also lost Brian Rakpo and Kerrigan for the year, two of their best defenders, Zach. One thing that I'm concerned about, and after watching the Bengals give up 900 yards in the first two games, they have never been able to contain a running quarterback before, at least to my mind. I still remember in the preseason, granted it was preseason, but Aaron Rodgers running all day in that opening drive. I'm really concerned that this guy, RG3, who is taking the NFL by storm, I could see him running for 200 yards on us. That's how poorly this defense is playing right now.
Well, but that becomes into the question of is Mike Shanahan going to risk running him that many times? And I would say that the one thing that I've seen in the games that I've watched, and I haven't watched the full games of Washington, but he doesn't appear to me to be necessarily a run-first quarterback, at least not at this point. He's been able to make enough throws that he's able to get some sort of a balance. I would say it's a genuine concern against a running quarterback, but I'm not sure that Mike Shanahan wants to go full tilt into what, say, Michael Vick was a few years ago, or what some other quarterbacks were, Jeff Garcia type of thing, where they would run and that would be their primary weapon. I don't think they want to do that with RG3, especially this early, because that's a good way to get hurt early on. And right now, I mean, he's what they have going for them. You've got to protect that quarterback, and I would say that it's probably unlikely that he's going to carry the ball, say, 20 times. I'd be more concerned about him throwing to set up his own personal runs and kind of playing into whatever blitz packages he sees, maybe being able to escape those and give you guys problems down the field. I could see that happening. I saw that happen last week against St. Louis a couple times, where I don't think they were designed runs. I think they were passes that he got into some trouble and he was able to get out of them and make some good runs out of it. I think that the biggest thing is, can you force him to throw the ball? Because I would say that, that would be probably a good thing, because as you say, the running quarterback is what concerns you. If they can force him to throw the ball more often than anything else, they might give themselves a chance. Now, last week, probably the biggest disappointment for the Bengals, in my point of view, was that they didn't force any turnovers from the quarterback position, since I thought that was a near certainty. So you have to be able to hope that if they can force RG3 to throw the ball, they might be able to create some turnovers, even though they didn't do it a week ago. But that could be the key. The one thing that we haven't really seen him do yet, we haven't really seen him struggle. And if you could get him to make a few mistakes early on in the game, it'd be interesting to see how he deals with adversity for the first time in his NFL career, and that could be an edge for the Bengals.
A fellow BGSU alum in the chat room, Zach, his name's Kurt. He messages us. He says their offense is first in points, fourth in yards, 11th in passing, and fourth in running. So their offense is pretty good.
Yeah, it is. It has been, at least, and I would say that the first 2 weeks, though, here's the one thing that we do have to say. There has to be a caveat here with what they've done, and I think the first thing is they did it against the Saints. Do we really know right now how good the Saints are?
That's true.
Because nobody expects the Rams to be in the playoff hunt at the end of this season. Everyone expects the Saints to be good, but with all the turmoil that the Saints have had to go through, both in personnel, in coaching, and all those things related to Bountygate, we really don't know what type of competition they've faced yet. Now the Bengals, let's face facts, the Bengals coming into this season, for whatever else you want to say, they have the expectations of winning this division. So on paper, you might say this might be the best team that RG3 has faced just yet. So I don't know that those statistics are necessarily something that you can say, well, he's definitely going to do this against the Bengals again. It's a week-to-week thing, and obviously we're just 2 weeks into the season. But I would say that you would have to think that the Bengals defense is going to make some adjustments from last week and probably going to play a little bit better than they did in Cleveland. And they have the ability now, maybe the first team to perhaps rattle RG3 and cause him some problems.
Good news for the Bengals this week, it looks like. Finally, we've got some of their their players back to 100% health. It looks like Carlos Dunlap is going to play this week. He practiced full go today, so that's good. They also got Bernard Scott, a backup running back as well. He's full go. Still waiting on their first-round draft pick, Dre Kirkpatrick, to see the field. He's still coming off a knee injury. Doesn't look like he's going to play this week. Not even really sure what his timetable is at this point. But it's good. It's good in the sense that they get Dunlap back. He's probably their best pass rusher on the defensive front. What concerns me, Zach, and here's where I think a lot of coordinators are going to get in trouble this year when defending RG3. You're going to drop back and make him throw it. And what I mean by that is you're going to rush 4, and you're just basically going to make RG3 beat you with his arm. And that's my fear, is because now if the guys up front don't play disciplined, they break contain, now you got RG3 running down the field. I saw, and I still remember this play vividly to this day. Joe Flacco in his rookie year had like an 80-yard touchdown run against us. That's what I'm saying. I am scared that RG3 is going to rush for 2 bills because he has that ability.
He has that ability. I would say that the big thing is, though, again, it all comes down to how good your coverage is. The thing is, if your front 4, and this is also the problem, because I was surprised at the lack of, they got to Whedon. Speaking of the defensive line, they got to Whedon a number of times early in the game, but as the game wore on, I didn't feel like they brought as much pressure as I would have thought. I would have thought that the Bengals' front 7 would have been able to bring far more pressure than it did. And that would be the biggest concern. If you can bring pressure to RG3, he's going to get hit just as much as anybody else. But if you rush 4, no secondary in the world can cover forever. So you have to be able to get to him. You have to be able to get to the quarterback. And that's what the Bengals really didn't do last week. And that was what I expected them to do against Whedon. I expected them to come in and be able to kind of assert their will. If you told me one of the teams would have gotten 6 sacks, I would have thought it would have been the Bengals, because the Browns' offensive line was so shaky in that first game against the Eagles. But when they didn't bring the pressure like I thought they would, now they got a couple sacks on Whedon. They were able to disrupt some plays because of the pressure. The key for the Bengals is they have to find a way to get to RG3. If they don't bring us sufficient pressure, that's what you're worried about, because no secondary in the world is going to be able to cover forever. And if they get too far off, well, then RG3 can take off.
Yeah.
The question that I have is, can RG3 at this point in his career make all the throws? Because if you give him a lot of coverage downfield, it'll be interesting to see how often he wants to run and how often he wants to pass. If he can make all the throws that you expect an NFL quarterback to make at this point in his career, well, then he's super dangerous, and he's a guy who's going to make the Pro Bowl, and he's going to be a success early. I haven't seen him make all the throws yet, but I've seen him make some pretty good ones. The question is, if you bring pressure, can you get to him? And the Bengals weren't able to do that a week ago. If they can do that this week, I think it could cause RG3 some trouble, because, again, from watching those first 2 games, it didn't seem like he was under too much pressure. Now, again, I didn't see the whole game. I was able to watch some of it against the Rams, and it just seemed like he had a lot of time in the pocket and was able to make some decisions. You have to be able to rattle the kid's confidence early on, or else it's going to be the same type of performance that it was in Week 1.
The Bengals managed 2 sacks against the Browns. One of them was kind of a fluke, almost kind of a leg whip, kind of a trip play, which was on the first drive of the game, and then Vinny Ray, I believe, ended up having the second sack a little bit later on. They did have a big loss this week on the defensive line. Jamal Anderson put on the season-ending injured reserve list. They did sign Wallace Gilberry. He's a free agent who I guess a couple years ago had 7 sacks for the Chiefs. So, I mean, they lack a lot of depth on that defensive line, which has been really their key over the last 2 seasons, was how good their front 4 were. And they had so many that they could continue to rotate. They're really lacking that this year, and it's showing big time, because they're not able to stop the run. They're not able to tackle. That's the biggest thing, Zach. They can't tackle worth a lick. I mean, did you see the Trent Richardson play? Obviously you did. Yeah. I mean, you got to make those tackles. Come on now. And I got to tell you this. Ray Maluga playing middle linebacker for the Cincinnati Bengals, if he doesn't get it going, I mean, this week, he might be seeing some time on the pine. But he's got time on his side, because there's nobody that they have to back him up, because they're so short there as well. So I think I after seeing what I saw the first 2 weeks out of this defense, I'm scared for a lot of people's playing time over the next couple weeks because I'm just like I said, RG3 scares the living daylights out of me.
I never thought that Browns fans would say thank you to the Bengals for Frosty Rucker, but that's kind of where we're at. I mean, Frosty played really, really well last week. Now, I remember Frosty from the Bengals, and I thought he was okay last week. And I don't know if it was because it was against his old team or whatever. But all I could think was, why did the Bengals let this guy go? And it's he played really well. Now, I would say that if you look at the depth of the Bengals defensive line, Ray Maluga, I would say has been a disappointment for you guys. And
Yeah, that's an understatement, Zach.
I mean, I think when you guys got him in the '09 draft, I think a lot of people were saying, man, what a steal, what a steal, what a steal. Right now, he's got a bigger name for what he did in college than what he's done in the pros. And he continues to make himself a little bit of a lightning rod because he made those comments about Richardson. And the thing of it is if you're going to make those comments, you got to come out and you got to do something about it, because I think that what happened was it fired up Trent Richardson, and I think Trent Richardson's a better football player than most of the guys on that defensive line right now. So if you're going to talk the talk, and Maluga should know, there's going to be a magnifying glass on him now, because every time that he misses a tackle, somebody's going to say, "What? You're always opening your mouth. You got to play behind it." And I would say that the biggest surprise to me, you talked about the missed tackles. You talked about, I saw the tweet that you had about Zimmer, get them together, or sit them all. I think was what you said, sit them all.
Yeah,
And I kind of chuckled about it, but that was just, because I thought they don't have anybody else.
that's
You,
true.
you can't sit them all because there's no, believe me, as a Browns fan, believe me, I feel your pain in this regard. We've not, depth is one of the hardest things to have in what is right now a passing friendly league, because you lose a guy and it's just there's the drop off, and we saw this in the secondary last week. The drop off between the first guys in the secondary and the second guys in the secondary is gigantic. And I assume it probably stands the same for most of the other positions. You just don't have that type of depth, and very few teams do, where you can continually lose a starter or be out 4 or 5 guys and those guys step in. I think the biggest difference right now is the difference between the starters and the backups in defensive football right now, because usually if you lose an impact player, you're going to feel it the next week. And certainly that's what it looked like with the Bengals, where as that game wore on, it got easier and easier and easier for the Browns to find holes and pick up chunks, whether it was running with Richardson or Whedon throwing down the field. I mean, the pass to Greg Little, he was wide open.
Yeah.
And I always thought, going into this game, that, again, the discipline that you guys have shown over the last several years, when you guys have had good seasons, whether it be '09, last year, it's been the discipline of your defense. And that has been the strength. And yet, when Whedon was throwing, you saw guys surrounded, brown jerseys, surrounded by white jerseys, still able to pick up the ball and pick up an extra 15 yards. That was a huge surprise. And I would think that also, if you look at the offense for next week with the Redskins, I'm sure they're looking at the same thing and thinking, we can attack this secondary. We can get RG3 time. And that has to be, in my opinion, if you can't get to RG3 and you allow him time to either run or to throw, that's got to be the biggest thing. The Bengals have to find a way to bring pressure to RG3, or it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, I'm very concerned. If I haven't stated that enough during this episode, I am really worried.
I think that's the title. That's the title for this week, isn't it?
That's a good idea. I might have to do that. That's oh man, yeah. I just keep thinking of that play where Trent Richardson ran over like 4 guys for a touchdown, and I'm really I can't say it enough. I am very
losing
very
Arakpo
concerned.
is going to help you guys offensively. I should say that Arakpo being out
Yeah.
will be, because he's one of the best. I just talked about losing a defensive cog. Arakpo, not only does he do fantastic Geico commercials, but he also has a really good career going. And with him being out for the season, you just can't replace a guy like that. And that should give Andy Dalton some more room to work against that Redskins defense.
I was really proud of this moment on Sunday when I was live tweeting, and I don't know if people saw this or not, but there was a play that Frosty Rucker made. He sacked Dalton, and he
Right.
got up and he put his back to the Bengals sideline and then did the whole point to his name thing. And I tweeted during the game, "Wow, stay classy, Frosty. That was your first sack at Paul Brown Stadium in 7 years."
I saw that, and I saw that, and I kind of chuckled about it. And I will say there were two things that bothered me about Sunday's game. From a Rucker pointing to his jersey was one thing. The other thing that bothered me was Greg Little's dance. I give it a 3.5 out of 10.
What was
Uh,
that?
you're down. We've talked about this. We used to talk about this at BGRSO. You're down 7 points. You are a big reason why the Browns. Speaking of Greg Little, big reason the Browns lost in Week 1. He couldn't handle a pass by Whedon, and it was picked off in the red zone. Okay, so him getting up and dancing, it does bother me. I mean, I understand you got to let it go. You got to, they're going to be players are going to be players. That's how they're going to be. But the Browns, again, as a Browns fan, I'm looking at the schedule and I'm saying we're 0-2. We're going against Buffalo next week, and Buffalo is 1-1. And if we don't win, this whole organization is going to be blown up because, as you probably know, Jimmy Haslam's bought the team, and there will be a total culture shock here for what this franchise has been over the last 14 years to what it's going to be a year from now. And I think everybody should realize that the only way that these guys can secure themselves, whether it be players or front office, is to win football games. And the Bengals are 1-1, the Browns are 0-2. So for all the dancing and all the jiving and all whatever it was that was going on Sunday, with the Browns being celebratory. At the end of the day, Bengals won that football game. They're 1-1, and right now the Bengals are better than the Browns. The standings say so.
Well, Zach, I know it was short notice. I just want to send a big thanks. Thank you for joining me here on Who-Dey Weekly this week. I know that Mickey and Tim couldn't be here, and for you to fill in on such short notice, I really do appreciate you stopping by. If folks want to follow you on Twitter, where can they get you at?
They can catch me at Zach the Writer, Z-A-C-H, the Writer, at Twitter. Of course, most of those tweets, as you know, are Browns related, and of course, I'm a sports writer for the local paper in Seneca County, so there's a lot of tweets about that. I don't want to mislead anybody there. It's not going to be all NFL, but there is a lot of Reds stuff. As you know, I'm a huge Reds fan. A lot of Reds, a lot of Indians, a lot of Browns, and of course, I follow the Bengals as well, just because I think you and I. We're brothers in one way or another in this. I think from being from Ohio, as much as we give each other grief about it, we'd like to see the Ohio guys do okay, especially when it's against the Steelers and the Ravens. So you can follow me at Zach the Writer. I have a blog at advertiser-tribune.com. It's called Baker Street. I do NFL picks each week. So if you get a chance to check that out, that'd be great, and I'd appreciate it. And as far as me short notice, hey, anytime, I'm happy to be here.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, and BGSU is better off because we're on the air together, my friend. Have a good one, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Nick, and good luck to you guys the rest of the year.
All right, man. That's Zach Baker. He's the sports editor of the Advertiser Tribune here on Who-Dey Weekly. Certainly a big thanks for him stopping by and joining me this week under such short notice, and big thanks to him. It's always nice to catch up with those Bowling Green alumni. A couple things before we head out. I'm going to give a prediction. I'll say Bengals win 27-24. That's my prediction. I haven't said it enough. I'm very concerned about what this defense has done the last 2 weeks. I really do. I would not be. I'll go bold and say RG3 has 200 yards rushing, not passing. Rushing. I'm concerned. Reed in the chat room says 35-13 Bengals. Reed's living in a dream world. I'm just saying. Again, there has been no evidence over the last 2 weeks that tells me we will hold the Washington Redskins to 13 points. Tell me where I'm wrong there. I don't see it. Zim is not going to light up a fire under this D because I don't know if he's got the personnel to do it. They've been waiting for years to get a fire lit under Malaluga. It still hasn't worked. Just saying. I'm extremely dissatisfied with the way the defense played the first 2 weeks. Let's hope that they can get it together. And, again, I'll say 27-24, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Email me at podcast@whodayfans.com. Love to hear your thoughts on what the Bengals have done so far and what you think they'll do here in the next coming weeks. I think that's going to do it. I can't believe me and Zach, we went on for 42 minutes. That was quick. Man, big thanks to him for stopping by and helping me out on short notice. And hopefully we can catch up with Mickey and Tim next week. And until then, that is going to wrap it up for episode 81. Don't forget, email us podcast@whodayfans.com and follow us on Twitter @Who-Dey Weekly. Who-Dey Weekly is an SPNT production. For more information about our other podcasts, log on to spnt.tv. For Mickey and Tim, I'm Subes. Hey, we'll see you next time on Who-Dey Weekly. Who-Dey.